Okay. Always remember that I have taken more out of alcohol than alcohol has taken out of me. This quote was said by Winston Churchill. Maybe you all should know him. Drinking has been around since the beginning of beginning of time practically, and all liquors are basically the same in the aspect of what they do. They intoxicate you. Even though all these drinks are very similar in their purpose, they are all actually very different. Today I will be talking about 3 specific liquors, which will be vodka, whiskey, and tequila. Today I'm here to explain the differences between vodka, whiskey, and tequila. I will be talking about the origins of each drink, like their history, and I will be talking about how they are made. Okay, so first off, I will be talking about vodka, then I will be talking about whiskey, and lastly tequila. And before I begin, I will be saying 2 terms which I would like to clarify: fermentation and distillation. Fermentation is a chemical change brought about by yeast, bacteria, or a mold from an organism, which is important to turn the starches of a bacteria, yeast, or mold into a sugar. And distillation is a heating and condensing process that drives gas or vapor from liquids or solids to form a new substance, which basically concentrates the alcohol. Okay, so first I will be talking about vodka. Vodka first originated in Russia, where the first documented production was recorded at the end of the 9th century. During the Middle Ages, it was mostly used for medicine and in the production of gunpowder. In the 14th century, British ambassador to Moscow described vodka as a national drink. It wasn't until distillation was introduced to Russia in the mid-15th century that vodka was produced in larger quantities. In the beginning, only the nobility had the right to be able to distill the drink, so they used different things to turn into vodka. Everything from acorns to even watermelon. There's a whole list of different fruits, or mostly vegetables and greens. They had to distill it 4 times, and each time adding flavor and concentrating it. So it was an expensive process, and it wasn't mass-produced. It wasn't until the Napoleonic era, when soldiers came into the area, that it was greatly noticed, and they had to produce more quantities to fill the supply, so that's when they started to use potatoes, which is now the most generic thing to use. Okay, and the process to create vodka starts with the mashing of the grains or vegetables used. They are put into an automatic masher, which kind of looks like a washer machine with little agitators to turn starch into sugar. Then it is sterilized by boiling, and it's injected with lactic acid bacteria so it can ferment. The mash is then put into steel vats, as you can see, and then it is distilled so it can be concentrated. Water is added to the concentration because when it's distilled, it is 190 proof, which is undrinkable, and when you add water, it turns it to 80 proof, which is drinkable. And it is then packaged into glass bottles because that won't change the chemicals inside the. Okay, secondly, I'll be talking about whiskey. There's still debate whether it originated in Ireland or Scotland, and the first record of the Scottish whiskey is dated back to 1494. In American history, whiskey is most known about the Whiskey Rebellion in 1794, which is when Pennsylvania whiskey makers refused to pay a tax on the whiskey, and they burned down the home of the local tax inspector, which brought about different things. And since then, the whiskey makers in America had moved towards the Indiana and Kentucky region, states, which is still famous for its whiskey. Okay, whiskey is made with water, yeast, and grain. Water is said to be the most important factor in making whiskey. It has to be clean and free of iron, and water used in the United States usually has carbonates. And the reason why Scottish whiskey is said to be so good, the mystery of it is supposed to be in the water from Scotland. There's a big mystery as to why that is the best water cheese to make whiskey. The grains used to make whiskey are all different, but at least a little bit has to be malted barley. All grains but the barley are ground and pressure cooked. The barley is malted to create enzyme amylase, which converts the barley starch into sugar. To make the mash, warm water is added to the grains and barley so they can ferment, and yeast is added. There are two types of yeast. One is called new yeast, which they refer to as sweet mash, and yeast that is used from a portion of the old, previous, when they make these, is called sour mash, which is the most popular. It is distilled twice, and then it becomes what is called high wine. Tennessee whiskey is different because the high wine is filtered through charcoal before and after it is aged. Water is added to the high wine and is aged. Scottish whiskey is aged in cool, wet conditions, and American whiskey is aged in warm and dry conditions. And the whiskey is aged in wood barrels made of white oak specifically because that is the only wood where it won't seep through and leak, and the whiskey can move in and out the pores of the wood to give it an extra flavor. And whiskey is aged 3 to 4 years, and many are aged 10 to 15 years. Okay, and lastly, I will be talking about tequila. Tequila originated in Jalisco, Mexico, which is the red area. And the pre-Hispanic tribes, this is where the main port, this is the only place where the agave is formed. There are many different types of agave plants, 136 to be specific, but tequila can only be made from blue agave, which is known as the Weber Azul plant. Pre-Hispanic tribes have been fermenting this plant for a long time, and it wasn't until the Spaniards brought distillation that tequila was finally born. To make tequila, they take off all the leaves of the plant, leaving the piña. This is the plant, and that's the piña. They take off all the leaves. They mash and press this plant and heat it up, and they boil it, which makes a juice called aguamiel. They ferment the aguamiel for 2 to 4 days. They distill it 2 to 3 times, and it has tequila in order, according to Mexican law, has to be aged at least 14 to 21 days. And according to law, it must be a minimum of 51% agave juice. Okay, so now that I have given you a quick introduction to these 3 drinks, although they have a similar process, you can see that they're all pretty different in their own aspects. So each time you pick up a bottle, imagine how that drink got to the store and to your hand. So please drink responsibly.
So John's not here. Hang on just a second then.